Hi everyone, this is Pratika Masani and I'm back here with another Power BI report. In this report, we're going to look at the newest Power BI preview feature, Sparklines. Sparklines are nothing but a tiny line chart with the no coordinates or no axis. They are very good when you want to emphasize patterns in your data. For that reason, I chose Covid-19 data to see the new cases pattern in all countries. So this is the report we're going to look today. So it's, as you could see, it's not only sparklines. We are obviously focusing on the sparklines, but there are a few other things I've also done, which I'm going to talk about. For example, by using narrative visuals, what is the design pattern related behind these numbers, and also just talking about the design thinking behind this report. Let's go to Power BI desktop. So what I have here is I have data by country. I have continent, I have location, date, and also new cases. So these are the 4 columns that I really wanted to focus on. So if I just go back here and create a blank page, start bringing those fields into my report. And if I look at the total count, I have 145k rows in this table. So there's not really having a table like this, it's not going to actually show my data very well. And the next thing is probably I want to be able to read data better. So for that reason, I'm going to add a slicer and add continent to my slicer. So that way I could select one continent and it makes a bit more easy to read. And let me remove the continent from here and change into matrix. Basically what I have here is I have various dates and the new cases in these locations. So this doesn't make much sense. So I'm going to remove date and probably add year, month name, and probably day of the month. So now my data makes a bit more sense and I could see more data. I could actually see the numbers and I could see which one is higher and which one is lower, and it basically gives me the data. So I'm going to remove this. Let's remove this. So this is what we have here. So there are a few things. There's a lot of numbers. There is no way I could see the pattern easily. And this is when we usually move to a line chart. And this is the line chart I have. And if I move location to legend, as you can see, I could see the pattern where which one is higher, and I could hover over to be able to see who has higher, or I could add tooltips or something else, or I could enable the data labels and things. But lines are overlapping in this visual. So that is another really good use case for this. For the sparklines is like if you don't want your lines to overlap, or if you want to show different lines in one visual, that's when you could also go for sparklines. So back in this visual, I'll change this back into a table or a matrix. And I'm going to remove my date column. And on my rows, I have location. And the new cases, I'm going to add a sparkline. You could add sparkline various ways, but I'm going to choose here. And in my axis, I'm going to add my axis is date, so I'm going to do it based on that. So now you could see I have a sparkline which shows the pattern in the data very nicely. The thing I am interested in is to see the peak points. So for that, I'm going to go to Sparklines, and what I'm interested in is to show the highest point. And I could choose a different color. Let's go to purple, and that gives me, well, that's my data color. Well, that works too. So that shows me the pattern. So for example, if I sort this by new cases, and I come from UK, as I could totally see there was a peak recently and it's slowly going down. And if I compare this to Asia, again, I was born in India and I know there is a peak in India. And we could actually see a pattern. So for example, if you see in the Europe, quite a few countries already had their peakest point was latest, but if you go to Asia, I think that it is just happening now, and you could see there was a peak before probably Delta variant or things like that. As you could see quite quickly, I could see the patterns in the data by changing my slices or moving around, and very quickly I could see the pattern. Now the next thing is to how to make this visual or this report a bit more dramatic. So there are a few things I have in this visual. There is a lot of data, and I have quite a few countries, but I won't be able to see all the countries in one page, which I would like to see. And I also just emphasize on the sparklines and the countries, but I want to still be able to see the details of the data to be able to understand what's happening on the report. So for that one, I went for narrative visual. So that's what's happening here. Actually, before we look into the narrative visual, let's look at one more thing. One of the first things is I want to be able to see all my data in one page. For that reason, I went to page information, page size, went to custom, and increased the height of my page report. For example, 1500. That may not be the one I chose, but that gives you an idea. So, and then I extend my report the way I wanted to, and like, okay, so this is my page size, and then probably if I leave some space for my table, my title there, for that, then I could change the page size to maybe 1300, and that's kind of quite nice. It fits my table or matrix and my narrative visual on the right, and also if I want to add title there. And the slicer, I don't like the way this slicer is looking, so I'm going to change that into a horizontal slicer, so that way it's a bit more nicely, easily. It would be nice and easily responsive, like to interact between the visuals. And the next thing is I'm going to disable all the backgrounds. That's a different story. And that's when, like, the space on the right, I want to use the narrative visual as here to be able to explain what's happening in my data. It is responding a bit slowly. For example, if I go to Europe, you could see like it is doing the narrative visual and explains what's happening in my data. So to get to the narrative visual, you could just drag, you could place the smart narrative, and then it explains what's happening in the data. Because of type of visualizations I have in this visual, my narrative actually doesn't show any narrative. For that, I need to find a workaround to make it work. So to make it work, what I usually do is I will remove this. So this is the data I'm looking at. I'll just copy, paste, and change this into something different, a visual which works for smart narrative. For example, like this one. I have location, I have new cases, and I also need date. So I'm going to keep date and change location into legend. So now I have a bit more data. So if I add smart narrative now, it gives me the analysis, because here data is summarized. In here, the data is not summarized. That's why the narrative visual didn't work. So I'm just going to remove this now. And even though now I don't have that other visual on the canvas anymore, but my narrative still works. As I can change my slicer, as you could see, it still works. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is I'm not a fan of having this new cases as a number here. So I'm going to remove that column so that I could just emphasize my sparklines, but the user won't be able to actually see what's happening in here. So that's when I created a tooltip. So this is my tooltip. Because obviously when the user hover over on a country, I want to show what country they hovered on. And the next thing is I want to be able to see, what are the new cases at that point, the latest new cases, total vaccinations and the total boosters, which I think probably impact on the number of new cases. And then I also wanted to, instead of showing the only new cases pattern, I wanted to show the other patterns, like how the vaccinations has been happening, how the total boosters has been happening. And I wanted this tooltip to work based on the location. So I added location as my tooltip. And I also, obviously, if you want the page to be used as a tooltip, you need to enable this. So I turned the tooltip on and I added the location to my tooltip column. So now when I go back to my distribution page, if I hover over, I could see this. The other thing I wanted to emphasize on this report is, like, when was the last time the report has been refreshed? Because you don't actually see the date here. Even when you hover over, the axis doesn't give you the precise date. So for that, again, I'm just using a measure here. I'm using last update, and it's a simple DAX measure, and I am using this in a text box with a value that is basically, I am asking a question here saying to bring the last update measure in here. So, and I get my last updated measure in my text box based upon what country I click on. That changes pretty much. It's been updated 5 days ago, as you could see. The other thing I wanted to focus on is, just like how I'm showing in the tooltip, the total number of new cases, total vaccinations, and the boosters, I wanted to show here as well, like an overall view. This is bit mostly to unify the design I'm going for. The other thing I also added on the top of this is to make sure I disabled the icons that I don't really need. For example, if I go here, this text box, or if I actually look at this matrix, I went here, and if I look for icons, as you could see, I disabled quite a few icons, except a few which are like a visual warning, information icon, error icon. I don't really want to have the tooltip, pin, or focus mode icon because I sometimes find them a bit distracting. The same thing happening with the slicer. For slicer, I have all the icons, but I disable the pin icons and the filter icon. And one more thing I'm doing on the slicer is I added a tooltip to explain users like what they can do. Like, they can click on an item to select or unselect. I think for selection, it's quite easy to understand, but to unselect, probably not everyone understands. So for that, I added that as my tooltip, and I also added, you could hold control to select multiple items. The next thing, and I think I really like this feature in Power BI in the slicer, is we have this new label on the top. I don't really know if it's super new or not. But anyway, what we have here is you could have show summary, which is really nice because when you click on something, it shows you clicked Europe. And if I hold control and click another one, and it shows I selected multiple, which is really good. So I enabled that one. And that's when I wanted to have my layout to be able to have this line everywhere so that I could explain what's happening in each visual. And for the slicer, what we have done is in the slicer header, I chose an outline, and that only for bottom, and I changed the outline color to the same color as the other visuals. For the rest of the visuals, it's just a line and and a text box, but I've grouped them together, and once I group them, I just copy and paste everywhere I wanted to, and then it's easy to make sure that like they all are same font, same size, and like same colors and things like that. So that's pretty much what I have done. All these lines disappears once I publish. So if I look at the published version, so this is how it looks. So if I go to full screen, and this is kind of a scrollable effect, a user can go and click on the country or continent they want to. They can hover over on a visual to be able to see the what's happening, more details of that particular sparkline. And I also have this kind of the information, like if there are any warnings and things like that, I could see what's happening there. And in this case, I was not really be able to click on that eye. That's because of my selection order, because my matrix is all the way in the bottom. So if I move it up, then I should be able to see what's happening there. But you could also see my column headers. Yeah, that's another thing I missed. So what I also done in this matrix and is I went to column headers because I wanted to show these sparklines as a visual than a matrix. So for that, I used font color as same as my background color. So that way you don't really see column headers when the layer order is in the bottom. So, but the problem here is when the layer order is all the way in the bottom, I won't be able to see the information that I wanted to see because of the layer order. So there's few things I could try to do here. So this is let's try to find out the matrix. This is the group it's part of. So if I move my matrix in here, if I move the shape up, and now if I do this, I could actually, without showing my column headers, and I could see the information icon. Let's publish this to see how it looks in the Power BI service. Okay, now I could hover over to see what's happening on that visual. So that's it. That's how I created this COVID-19 distribution report. What I love about Sparklines is like how quickly, as you saw, how quickly you could see the patterns in the data. But make sure in the process of emphasizing the patterns, you're not actually missing the facts behind it. So try to show the patterns, but also where needed, show the details of the data as well. Hope you learned something. I'll see you in the next video.